here. Alfredo, so it's over to you first, if that's all right, and you can say hello to everyone.
Thank you, Kerry. Thank you very much for everyone, actually. It's really nice to see a lot of known faces. And I'm really glad that you're not zoomed out completely. Not yet, at least. So it's great actually to gather here. It will be better in person, but you know, that will come in time, slowly. So shall we wait a couple of minutes still? There are some +8 people coming in, some AKT members. Let me see. Yeah.
I think you can probably get started.
Alfredo, I think I would start.
Okay.
Yeah, I would start.
Okay, super. All right, thank you very much, actually, and welcome to everyone. I just give you a brief overall picture about how this webinar came about. My name is Alfredo Cremerotti. I describe myself. I'm a male, white, middle-aged, with no hair. I know it doesn't sound great, actually, as a description, but here we go. That's what you get. I live in North Wales. I direct an art institution called Mostyn, which is one of the UK art institutions, contemporary arts places, part of the +8 network. This network, the +8 network, is made of 48 institutions, modern and contemporary art museums and galleries, some with collections, some without collection, some with a venue, some without a venues, and they across the UK, from Cornwall to the Orkney Island up in Scotland. The network, Kerry, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it started about 10, 12, 13 years ago.
Yeah, 2008.
2008, there we go. As a way to basically share know-how and share also the collection, actually, that originally was located in Tate only, but it grew up out of this collaborative sort of a way of sharing exhibition into a much more closer network that meet every few months for workshop and seminars and informal meetup. And it's a network that shares know-how, shares knowledge, shares actually the principle of what it means to stage contemporary and modern art exhibitions, how to use collection, how to use temporary exhibition for the benefit of all, for the benefit of our community. Each of the 48 organizations +8 is actually located in specific locations. Some of them are urban location and city settings, and some of them are along the coast, or some of them are in the middle of the countryside, and some of them are
ja, ich bin zwar in der Videokonferenz, muss aber selber nicht reden.
And the IKT instead is a network which is worldwide, so it's not based in the UK. It's actually started in the 90s in Europe, in Germany specifically, and it connects contemporary art curators from all around the world. Some of them are actually institutional curators, so they work for an organization or an institution or a gallery. Some of them are independent. Some of them run different things and contemporary art festival rather than exhibitions or commissions or residencies. So it's kind of a wider sort of a network. I'm part of both networks, was the +8 as the director of Mostyn and as part of the IKT since a number of years. And because on both networks we were actually talking about organizing gathering to share knowledge basically, and to possibly provide some solution or at least some answers to some of the queries, or having just kind of an exchange about different sort of trends and different types of problems and solutions, and we were doing in a parallel somehow, and so I approached actually the IKT and the +8 said, guys, why don't we actually pool together our resources in terms of addressing these issues and having these exchanges, but on a more global scale. So we pool together basically support and funding and knowledge and speakers contact, and here we go. We have actually the first of our 2 webinars. The second one, it will be in early next 2022. This is about actually sustainable design and regenerative architecture, specifically applied to cultural spaces, which is what is all interest for us actually, because somehow we are working within a cultural space or for a cultural space or in provision of a cultural space in the future. So that's my overall catching up sort of introduction. I pass the word actually to Kerry now. Thank you, Kerry.
Thank you, Alfredo. That was great. You've just given a really good overview of Plus Take there, so you've saved me a job. Thank you very much. I'm just going to be doing a bit of housekeeping for us, so I have popped that into the chat as well, but just to reiterate it, if you wouldn't mind, please could you all ensure that your Zoom names have your own name and also your organisation or your job title. This will just be really useful for us when we're doing breakout spaces, so that you can all see where each other are hailing us from, and yeah, it'd just be really helpful if you could do that for us. If you haven't done that before, if you're on gallery view, you just hover over your own face and then you'll see 3 dots in the top right hand corner of your little box. If you click that and then click rename, you're also welcome to include your pronouns in there too. The session is recorded, but it will only be shared internally to the Plus Tape network. If you prefer not to be viewed on the recording, you can just use the chat function to ask any questions or give us any comments. The presentations will be shared on the IKT platforms, but only the presentations, not the general conversation. So closed captioning, if you would like to make use of that, is available via Otter, which is in the top left corner of your screen. You don't need to sign up to view the live transcript, but it does pop up with a box when you click onto it, so just click the X. And finally, if you could please stay muted until the Q&A, which will be at 10:50 a.m. EST and 10 to 4 if you're in the UK. More than welcome to shout out any questions that you've got at that point, so just use the raise hand function or just give me a wave or drop me a message in the chat, however you prefer, to let me know that you've got a question you want to say out loud, or you're also welcome just to use the chat function and it'll just come through to us as the speakers and the hosts. So that's everything from me, I think. So thank you again, Alfredo. I'm really, really grateful to you, particularly today, for connecting us with IKT and with Umbretta and all of our guest speakers, because they've been absolutely brilliant to work with. I'm really looking forward to you seeing everyone's presentations, because they're just fantastic. So I'm going to hand over to Umbretta and she's going to give us an overview of the session and then we can get started. So thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kerry, so much. And thank you, Alfredo, for that kind introduction. Just a quick correction. IKT actually started in the late 70s. Hard to believe we've been around for so long. But I am part of IKT. I've been on the IKT board since 2014. And I actually see we have the IKT president with us, Julia Draganovic, and some of our board colleagues. So warm welcome to them. And warm welcome to all of you. A huge thank you to our speakers for joining us from close and afar, and to all of the audience for joining this important conversation today. As Kerry mentioned, my name is Umbretta Agro. I live on Miami Beach, and I run a platform called ArtSail that brings together artists with scientists, marine experts to investigate how climate change impacts the waterways surrounding South Florida. So sustainability, resiliency, regeneration are issues that are very dear to me and to my heart. So I was thrilled to be working with Mostin and Plus Take to put together this incredible panel. I'd like to start today by doing a land acknowledgement. And I, as I mentioned, live on Miami Beach. I stand on the traditional homeland of the Tequesta, the Calusa, the Taino, and today the Miccosukee and Seminole tribes. I also honor, respect, and uplift the generations of African diasporic and migrant people that have built Miami and make it the community that it is today. I pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and future. I am a white Caucasian. I middle-aged also. Oof, it's weird to say that. I have brown hair with blonde highlights and green eyes. And again, welcome to everyone to this Sustainable Design and Regenerative Architecture in Cultural Spaces panel. I'm gonna create a short text and sort of introduction so that we can put in context the conversation that we're going to listen to today. And I'm gonna start by reading a beautiful quote by Mahatma Gandhi that I feel really encompasses the discussions and the topics that we'll be touching upon today. This is how it goes. The earth provides enough to satisfy every man's need, but not enough for every man's greed. While museums are among the public buildings responsible for the greatest waste of energy, environmental sustainability and attention to the use of green practices have led to the creation of many eco-friendly museums. Whether it is bioarchitecture or adherence to small and yet critical retrofitting practices, such as shifting to LED lights, installing photovoltaic panels, better insulation, and rainwater harvesting, eco-sustainable museums allow us to integrate culture with sustainability. Eco-sustainability becomes part of the mission and the vision of the museum itself. So in addition to safeguarding and protecting the environment, green museums also strive to spread awareness and promote culture of sustainability by all available means. Argentinian architect Emilio Ambas, a pioneer of the green movement, takes a wider approach to sustainable design, as it points out that the goal should be to reduce and, if and when possible, to compensate for our intrusion in the vegetal kingdom. We're here today to discuss how we can move beyond sustainable practices and behaviors by exploring the concept of regeneration with the architectural and design fields. Doing less harm is no longer enough, in fact. The future of sustainability is regeneration, replenishing and restoring what we have lost and building communities and economies that thrive while allowing the planet to thrive too. Daniel Christian Wall, author of the book Design Regenerative Cultures, states, "We urgently need a Hippocratic oath for design, technology, and planning. Do no harm. To make this ethical imperative operational, we need a salutogenic, health-generating intention behind all design, technology, and planning. We need to design for human, for ecosystems, and for planetary health." With the help of our esteemed speakers today, we will travel from the macro to the micro of regenerative thinking. Curator and philosopher Dehlia Hannah, through her current project, Rewilding the Museum, encourages us to expand the curatorial mandate beyond the walls of museums and consider the earth as a total exhibition. Architect Dim Maltz, managing partner at Shigeru Ban Architects Americas, takes us from theory to practice by looking at how the studio incorporates sustainability in their architectural practices. Chaya Banti, founder of Vertiver, explains how her consulting agency applies visual thinking to the complex issues of climate change and sustainable development, while artist and designer Andrea Ling discusses how biologically inspired design processes can move society away from exploitative systems of productions to regenerative ones. Architect Gustav Düsing exemplifies sustainable responsive design in action with the responsive care center he and Karsu Chan conceptualized during the pandemic. And last but not least, architect and sustainable design advocate Jaya Kader will conclude our journey by sharing her Regen Lab projects in Africa, Costa Rica, and Vietnam, highlighting the power of design to help manifest sustainable practices that address environmental, social, humanistic, and economic concerns. I'm now going to read the extensive bios of our amazing speakers. It will take way too long, but Carrie is going to put in the chat a link where you'll be able to download a PDF with all information about them and links for you to explore. As Carrie mentioned, we will now move into the individual presentation section of this panel. Each panelist will speak for about 15 minutes. There will be no breaks in between. After this first hour and a half, we will move right into Q&A. So we encourage everyone to put your questions in the chat. However, you will be unmuted at the end, so you'll be able to ask your question live. We will then have a short break and move into the breakout rooms, which will be followed by the conclusion and takeaways. And now let's get this panel going. And again, thank you all for joining us today. And Dehlia, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. So first of all, just to say thank you, Amrata, for the lovely introduction, and to the whole organization for the invitation. Yes, as you said, my name is Dehlia Hannah. I'm a philosopher of art and science, and more recently a curator focused on issues of environmental crisis and the Anthropocene. I am from New York City. I'm a multi-ethnic Caucasian woman, brown hair, brown eyes. I'm also 9 months pregnant, which I don't think the viewing audience can see, but if I get a bit out of breath, forgive me for that. And I'd also, before I start, like to say thanks to Gustav Düsing for the connection, to introducing me to Amrata. And I think it's actually quite relevant to mention that I met Gustav in Antarctica as part of an art exhibition called the Antarctic Biennale, organized by the artist Alexander Ponomarev and the curator Nadim Saman. And it was quite a formative experience, I think, for everyone, and kind of indicative of a sense of where art can be, what a kind of aesthetic gaze can bring to thinking about a space from the quotidian, your backyard or your front door, to the remote and kind of sensitive, ecologically sensitive parts of the world, like the poles. So I'm going to talk today about a new project that I'm working on as a researcher at Arken Museum of Art in Denmark and the Royal Danish Academy of Art. And it's called Rewilding the Museum. I'll just share my screen now and try to bring that presentation up. Let's see how the technology cooperates. Okay, can everyone see? I'll assume the technology is cooperating.
Yes.
You can let us know if it's not. Yes, so Rewilding the Museum is a 3-year research and curatorial project that will involve publications, conferences, and a series of exhibitions, both within the museum, we hope, funding pending, and also beyond its walls, sometimes in contexts that are not usually spaces of art. It will also include an exhibition catalog, which will include sites of intervention, which I'll be suggesting further in this presentation, that could never fall within the scope of an exhibition. And as Amrata said, thinking about the whole world as an exhibition involves thinking about the whole world as places in which our kind of critical aesthetic and kind of political gaze that the kind of forms of judgment that we tend to exercise within the museum might also be applied. As a suggestive image, we have here Marguerite Humeau's very recent exhibition, Levitation, which involved a meditation on weeds invading the museum space of the Galeries Lafayette. And it's exemplary of what I think is a very important current trend in contemporary art and biennales, exhibitions, of really taking on the contemporary crisis as something that is relevant to the thinking of what a museum should be, what an art institution can do. Representative of this very recently is the exhibition at the Sao Paulo Biennale of the Santa Luisa meteorite, which is one of as pictured here, it's a very large stone. It looks like it could be a volcanic rock, but actually it's an enormous meteorite. And it's significant because it was one of the few objects to survive the National Museum in Rio's devastating fire in September of 2018. And so the organizers of the Sao Paulo Biennale took this as an object of one of several objects of inspiration. It's, again, it's not an artwork, and it's not even presented as for example, a found artwork, but rather it's presented as exemplary of a contemporary moment in which art and its institutions might take on the entangled ecological and political crises of the moment. So in this project, which is based at Arken, which is pictured on the left, I am trying to think through what it means to take on ecological crisis, specifically within the architectural and institutional context of a museum. Arken is quite a special institution at which to house this project, because it is, well, you can see a little piece of its architecture on the left here. It's situated in a kind of an intertidal zone. It's surrounded by water and reeds and grasses, birds and bugs. It tends to be rather covered with spiders at this time of year. And the architecture of the museum, and the name, it means the Ark in Danish. And it was the result of an architectural competition in the 1990s. And it's quite a radical piece of work. It is meant to be situated directly on a beach, as though it was a ship that was either beached on the sand, or perhaps from further away looks as if it's sitting out in the water. And it has its internal gallery spaces and its external structure are sort of suggestive of a structure that might be floating in the water or could be situated on land. And it's the dialogue between land and water that's kind of the museum itself is taking on. However, because of practical concerns and ecological concerns, it was not possible to build Arken directly on the beach. It was located 200 meters inland. And just recently, in the last 5-6 years, they received permission to build the waterway that you see pictured in this image. So it is actually not situated in a natural waterway, but rather a kind of artificial moat that was built around the museum. But nonetheless, now it takes on an increasingly kind of naturalistic appearance, as well as attention from the environmental regulators of Denmark, who've expressed some concern about disturbing the ecology that has taken place in this context with too much in the way of art installations, which tend to be located in the water. So there are a number of outdoor works. One of them is pictured here by Tua Greenfort, Limulus polyphemus, a living fossil, which are a series of sculptures of horseshoe crabs that are emerging from the water. Perhaps what's striking about this in the context of Denmark, less for me coming from North America, is that this would be a species that would not normally be present. It looks quite alien, perhaps even like a fiction in this context. And it's just one example of a number of works that have interested me, both in past curatorial projects and in this project going forward. Works that invite us to really be attentive to how we encounter both natural or wild environments or outdoor environments, and to the way that art institutions frame and kind of constrain or shift our encounters with those kinds of environments. So this is an image of an artwork by Fabian Knecht, a German artist, one of the group of students who participated in Olafur Eliasson's Institute for Spatial Experiments earlier in going back to 2014. And I would love to leave it for the audience. I would love to always ask the audience what they see here. But what I'll just begin by describing is a very luscious and kind of rough and wild looking little patch of forest, and through the middle runs a stream. And it is situated inside a stark white cube gallery with fluorescent lights on the ceiling and very clean white walls. And it's quite ambiguous looking at this image, whether we're looking at a doctored photograph or an installation inside of a museum, or whether there's something else going on. There's something a little bit uncanny about the image. You see the reflection of the fluorescent lights in the water. So although there's a real invitation to look at the trees and stumps of wood and the water, there's also something very artificial about this environment. And looking at it, you become acutely aware that we are looking at something like nature in a box. A big box, a little box, a terrarium remains to be determined. Another image helps to clarify this a little bit. We see the same situation, this time looking a little bit more trampled and trodden, and there are several people inside of the space now. So we know that it is large enough to accommodate medium-sized human visitors, and they're sort of looking out over this very small landscape, somewhat in the pose of Caspar David Friedrich's famous Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog. They're kind of gazing out over nature. We see them from behind and are invited in a way both to look at them and to imagine what it is they're looking at. But the act of gazing at the landscape is foregrounded. And now I'll clarify that that is an installation view from a moment in the construction of this image, which becomes more and more clear as we start to learn about its origins and its motivations. So there's already quite a prominent resonance of this image with Olafur Eliasson's previous work, Riverbed, which was exhibited at the Louisiana Museum of Modern Art in Denmark in 2014. An exhibition that I also saw and was quite compelled by. And yet we still don't know from looking at Fabian's image whether we're looking at something similar. Olafur created a very minimalistic representation of a stream bed or a riverbed inside the museum, and involved pumps and water and quite a large quantity of sand and rocks. And what was interesting about the installation was that in a certain way, although the context was so completely artificial and there was no real effort to hide that. We see low dropped ceilings, bright white walls and lights.
Sorry, Dehlia, you're 12 minutes, just FYI.
Okay, perfect, thanks. We nonetheless see people encountering this environment somewhat as if it were a natural environment. And so again, questioning what a museum context does or doesn't do to alter our perception of nature, or however we understand nature today. This is a question that Olafur Eliasson has taken up as well recently at the Foundation Weiler in 2021. But finally, let's return to Fabian Knecht's installation. So this is an exhibition I in fact curated with Nadim Zaman, who's leading a group of blindfolded visitors through this exhibition. And what they don't know when they enter the exhibition, or perhaps they do, but in a way they have an experience of surprise, is that this is not an artificial environment constructed inside of a museum, but rather a gallery space that has been built in the real world in a patch of forest near a lake in Bukow, Germany. And what I found compelling in each of my encounters with this work, which has also been built in scenes such as this, an ice flow in Vladivostok in Russia, is the meditation on the power of the gallery space for really altering our perception and kind of focusing our attention to a natural environment. In fact, what happened in the context of the exhibition in the forest is that over the course of the 3-week installation, the environment inside was almost totally destroyed, and we were confronted with the impact of our own footsteps, as well as the relationship between the gallery space and the ecological processes unfolding both within and without. The walls grew with mold and vines, there were bugs, and there were the imprints of human activity. And so in a way, it became an ecosystem that was very representative of our immersion in the outside world. So what Rewilding the Museum asks is how much museum or the art institutional space can allow those discourses in, and also consider to kind of unfold its own walls so as to be receptive not only into the kind of themes and questions of the Anthropocene and an ecological crisis, but also to exporting the critical perspectives of the museum to other spaces. So I know I have very little time, but I'd like to just click through a couple of other examples of what it means to think about eroding that boundary between the inside and the outside, between art criticism and a kind of critical perspective on the world at large, from infrastructure to engineering projects. Suggestive of this dialectic.
So sorry, Dehlia, one
Sure.
minute left and then I have to cut you out.
No
Apologies.
problem. No problem. So I'll just take our attention back art historically for one moment to a retrospective of Hans Haacke that I encountered in 2009 in New York City, which was striking for many reasons, but most of all, perhaps because in January, the windows of the gallery were left open, and the weather itself, the exhibition, which was called Weather or Not, was shot through by the most icy cold winds that New York had experienced in a long time. Ones that had invited people to think that perhaps climate change wasn't a problem after all. And at the same time, if we look at the conditions under which Venice prepares to receive guests from the international art world, we're confronted with works of infrastructure designed to protect the city as both an exhibition context and a living context for its inhabitants. Here pictured is a new set of seawalls designed to prevent flooding. And so I would invite our participants to think about the conceptual as well as the physical boundaries of the museum or the gallery as a kind of a line in how we encounter environmental crises of the 21st century. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dehlia. And again, apologies. I hate to having to interrupt your presentations. So apologies. I know I'll have to do it throughout the panel. And so thank you for that beautiful introduction and really thinking about this dichotomy of nature inside and outside a museum and bringing nature in and while looking at the environment as a place for exhibition. I would like now to introduce Dean Maltz. Dean, the floor is yours, and I'm excited about you be really taking us from sort of the theoretical space down to the practice by talking about some of your projects with Shigeru One Architects. So Dean, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Umbretta. Thank you for inviting me to this conference. I'm here in New York, a Caucasian, brown hair, middle-aged, and I am the managing partner of Shigeru One Architects in New York City. Shigeru One Architects is an internationally world-renowned architectural firm practicing since 1985. We have 3 offices worldwide, one in Tokyo, Paris, and in New York, which is the office that I manage, responsible for all projects in North and South America. We've completed over 150 projects on 6 continents. Shigeru One has been awarded the Pritzker Prize in 2014 and the Mother Teresa Memorial Award for Social Justice in 2017. And I'm honored to not only be Shigeru's partner, but I've been a friend and a co-student since 1980, both graduates of Cooper Union. These are just examples of some of our projects. We're a multidisciplinary design firm. We cover many project types that include museums, performing arts projects, academic buildings, offices, commercial buildings, which include restaurants, residential buildings, condominiums, houses, hospitality and hotels, and humanitarian projects. These are just some of the museums we've designed around the world. We specialize as museum and exhibition gallery designers. Many of you may already recognize some of our projects. At the lower left is the Centre Pompidou Metz in France. And at the upper right is the Aspen Art Museum, which I will be talking about in more detail later. Pictured here, the small fishing village of Corinda that was completely destroyed by the tsunami that hit Sri Lanka in 2004. Increased carbon in the atmosphere is raising the planet's temperature. We have already seen the Earth's temperature increase by 1.5 degrees. If we do not reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, switch to renewables, find ways to reduce energy consumption and sequester carbon already in our atmosphere, we will continue to suffer from severe weather events such as tsunamis, floods, and droughts. To address this global crisis, we need to reduce, reuse, and recycle. We at Shigeru Ban Architects do our part to help people affected by natural disasters, have been doing so since 1995. And in 2005, we worked to rebuild this fishing village. To address this growing crisis, we need to rethink how to make buildings more sustainable. There are primarily two ways we can make buildings sustainable. One by active means, employing mechanical systems, and the other by passive means, employing daylighting and natural ventilation. Photovoltaic panels on a solar sail at La Seine Music Hall in Paris demonstrates active means. It tracks the sun while moving around the concert hall made of massed timber. These images of the metal shutter house in New York demonstrate passive means with its rolling metal shutters and glass doors that enhance natural ventilation and daylighting. Natural ventilation and daylighting reduce the need for carbon-sourced energy. Large bifold doors behind perforated metal shutters allow cool breezes and natural light to permeate throughout the space. One of our core principles at Shigeru Ban Architecture is not to make any waste. There is a single Japanese word for it, motenai. Typically, exhibition buildings are constructed in concrete and steel and are short-lived and therefore wasteful. When Shigeru Ban Architects was asked to design a Japan pavilion for the 2000 Expo in Hanover, we used paper tubes instead of concrete and steel for the building structure. Not wanting to make industrial waste, we designed the entire structure to be easily recycled. The origins of Shigeru Ban's use in paper and architecture began in 1985. Shigeru used paper tubes to design the Alvar Aalto exhibit in Tokyo. Paper tubes create the ceiling of the exhibition, referencing back to Alvar Aalto's 1935 Vipuri library ceiling, which you could see at the upper right-hand corner of the slide. And paper tubes were also used in the Nomadic Museum that was designed to travel around the world from New York to Santa Monica and then to Tokyo. Wanting to reduce waste, we designed the building with reusable shipping containers and recyclable paper tubes. As the building traveled from city to city, shipping containers were rented and the paper tubes were recycled. Throughout Shigeru Ban's career, Shigeru has helped victims of natural disasters by using paper tubes in innovative ways. Shigeru Ban Architects has completed over 35 humanitarian projects in 17 countries. In 1995, after an earthquake in Kobe, he built 30 paper log houses. In India and in the Philippines, Shigeru used paper tubes in conjunction with indigenous woven grass mats, bamboo, and wood. After the 2011 earthquake destroyed Christchurch Cathedral in New Zealand, Shigeru built a temporary cathedral while the original cathedral was being rebuilt. Shigeru built a 20-meter tall temporary cathedral with paper tubes. And even the cross was made of paper. You can see that in the lower left corner of the slide. At first, the priest protested, concerned that a paper cross would be sacrilegious. But eventually, the priest agreed to keep the paper tube cross after hearing that in Japanese, paper and God are the same word, which is the word kami. Over the past 36 years, Shigeru Architects has evolved from paper tube structures to structures using wood, plywood, and mass timber. Our interest in wood comes from our love of nature. Wood is a renewable material that helps reduce energy consumption and carbon emissions. Shigeru's love of nature is reflected in the Hanagi Forest apartment project, whereby Shigeru designed an apartment complex that didn't cut down a single tree. Each of the 11 duplex apartments are built around tree-filled courtyards. The respect for nature and use of indigenous materials in Japan is so pervasive that there's a single word for it, kimon. Building accounts for approximately 40% of all global carbon emissions. Of the 40%, the building's operations, which is the energy used to heat, cool, and light these buildings, account for 28% of the carbon emissions. The remaining 12% goes into making of the building. And this chart indicates that by using wood instead of concrete and steel, wood reduces carbon emissions by 1/2 to 1/3, making wood the better choice. In addition, trees remove carbon from the atmosphere. Trees sequester carbon and they store it in their tree trunk. As trees grow, carbon makes up its cellular structure, making it a natural structural material. Wood is cut into what we commonly know as dimensional lumber, like 2x2s, 2x4s, 2x6s, and the aggregation of these boards, which you can see on the right-hand side, is mass timber. Mass timber comes in many forms, including glulam, which is at the top, CLTs, otherwise known as cross-laminated timber, and NLTs, nail-laminated timber, where dimensional lumber is put together with actual nails. These elements form the beams and the columns and the panels of our mass timber buildings. And due to code restrictions, wood has been used primarily in residential and commercial buildings under 6 stories. The International Building Code, recently enacted, enables architects to design buildings up to 18 stories in height, all out of wood. But technologically, mass timber enables buildings to go much taller. Terrace House in Vancouver, with a special approval, enabled us to build 19 stories, making it the world's tallest wood hybrid building under construction. An 8-story mass timber triangle sits atop a concrete podium. A misconception of wood structures is that they are unsafe because wood burns. In reality, even steel and concrete buildings burn. As wood burns, it creates a protective layer, a char layer of 5 centimeters, added to the wood provides 1 hour of fire protection. Wood structures are beautiful and reduce the costs of applying a fire protective layer, such as spray-on fireproofing or gypsum wallboard. At the GC Osaka building, we use plywood to act as both a finish layer and fireproofing. We demonstrated the fire performance of the plywood in a laboratory test. An additional benefit of wood is that it lends itself to prefabrication. And prefabrication reduces construction time of the site, allowing for shorter construction schedules. In the furniture house, plywood cabinets act as the walls, the storage, bookcase, and the structure. They were manufactured and brought to the site and erected in 2 days. The prefabrication promotes a safer work environment because people can work in a controlled environment in a factory. Prefabrication also promotes greater diversity and inclusivity in the workplace. Not only growing and using trees is good for the environment, but living with wood makes us feel good. And this is known as biophilia. Studies have proven that wood in nature and the environment promotes health, well-being, reduces stress, and improves cognitive function. In the Shishi-Iwa Hotel and Retreat, the structure, the walls, and the floors are all made of wood, and it contributes to the well-being of all the occupants. In addition to the health benefits of wood, Building with wood is economical. As compared to concrete and steel, wood allows us easily to build most any shape. At the Swatch Omega campus in Switzerland, we built an exuberant headquarters with a serpentine structure comprising nearly of 8,000 unique timber pieces. At 16,000 square meters, all three buildings combined make the complex one of the world's largest mass timber projects ever to be built. Contrary to many people's beliefs, wood buildings do not destroy the forest, but in fact, building in wood promotes greater forest management, greater health for our forest, and greater growth of our forest. And in just 10 hours.
Sorry, you're at 30 minutes, just FYI.
Okay, thanks. All the wood of the Swatch Omega campus can be completely regrown in the Swiss forest. That is 4,600 cubic meters of wood, equivalent to the volume that could fill 68 shipping containers. Now I'd like to explain to you how we incorporated sustainable principles into the Aspen Art Museum. Designed to contextualize with the surrounding neighborhood, the simple form of the Aspen Art Museum echoes the adjacent buildings. A woven wood lattice makes up the facade, fits into the nearby wood and brick buildings. The building was designed to harmonize with the natural environment. Shigeru felt that the most beautiful art in Aspen is the surrounding mountain and trees. And like Frank Lloyd Wright's Guggenheim Museum in New York City, the Aspen Art Museum was designed to be experienced from the top down. First one ascends a grand staircase and arrives at the rooftop plaza. From the rooftop plaza with the multi-purpose event space and cafe, one descends an internal stair that runs adjacent to the grand staircase. The building contains multiple sustainable features, a mass timber roof frame, a biophilia-inspired woven wood facade. And here at the building's main entry, if you look closely at the facade, you can see that the pattern subtly changes from the dense weave at the bottom right to a more open weave at the top left. Curtain walls and skylights promote natural daylighting. Skylights occur on the roof and on the rooftop plaza, illuminating the galleries below. Powerful sliding glass doors promote flexibility and natural ventilation. Photovoltaic panels next to the roof skylights provide carbon-free energy for the Aspen Art Museum. Now this concludes my presentation, and thank you for the opportunity to share the work of Shigeru Architects. As we strive to make the world a better place, wood is a key component to achieving our goal. The future of our planet is in our hands, so let's continue to work together. Let's roll up our sleeves and reduce carbon emissions in all of our work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean, for that beautiful, touching, and enlightening presentation. I am just so enthralled by how the studio is really able to merge culture, Shigeru's love of nature, and the concern for the present and the future of humanity in your practices. Really unbelievable work, and thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
And now we are moving to India. I'm so excited to have Jaya Banti with us. Jaya and I go a long ways back, and I was really fascinated to understand how you really bring visual thinking to explain and really bring to awareness to the larger masses, as well as to policymakers issues so complex such as the climate crisis and sustainable development. So I'm so looking forward to understanding more about what you do and how you do it, and the real impact on the communities that you're working with. So Jaya, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amrita. And Dean, I'm a huge fan of Shigeru Architects, so wonderful to see the images. Thank you so much. Just as a quick description of myself, I'm joining you today from India, in New Delhi, and I'm a South Asian middle-aged woman with salt and pepper hair and dark eyes. So I'll just quickly begin with my personal journey, and then I'll walk you through some of the work that I've done. And my career began in New York, where I spent about 15 years, starting out as a graphic designer, moving into exhibition design, curating some exhibitions as well, and then kind of heading a branding agency for luxury brands, kind of a wide-ranging career before I I switched over to sustainability, moved to San Francisco to work with Janine Benyus and Paul Hawken on third generation solar PV. So my entire life, I've sort of asked myself the question, at least my adult life, how I can possibly, where can I matter? What can I do for the environmental space? Where can I be of most help to the environment? So taking away all my experience, taking all of the synthesis of what I learned in New York and San Francisco, I moved to India. The original plan being that I would work in renewable energy, because I felt that that was going to be a very important area for emissions reduction. But as I started working in India, I realized this emissions reduction is only a very tiny bit of the much larger story. And if we focus only on that narrative, we miss out on incredible amounts of wealth that we lose out, if we don't. So I have an MBA in sustainability, so there's always this quantification and valuing what it is that you're saving. But I also realize that you can't always put a price on what you're saving, and that your entire lens has to be extremely broad to be able to sort of really make the real difference somewhere. So with that, I opened Vetiver, and I'm going to just take you through a presentation of some of our work, just to contextualize the work that I'm presenting, which is quite different from some of my colleagues here. I work on behavior change using design thinking and the visual thinking space as my tool and my medium. And my key audience really is communities on the ground and policymakers. And why that is because where I feel this difference is in changing the actual systems design and actually figuring out whether we can influence small points in a system, like Donella Meadows said, your leverage points. So if we are working at those leverage points like trim tabs, how can we actually pivot little systems, social systems or policy systems, etc., to create the change that we want to create and actually expand the conversation from emissions to resource conservation, etc. I apologize for the dog that's barking on my street. If you can hear it, I apologize for that. So here, just a quick introduction again to myself. Here I'm an advisor on a couple of these books that have just come out, and Regeneration is a wonderful book that has just come out. Paul Hawken has written it. I would really request everyone to read this book because it offers an incredible perspective of how we need to switch our lens to regenerative thinking. And I think my colleague Jaya later on will talk about this as well. We've also just launched a study that we did for the UK government on nature-based solutions. So when you think about holistic design, we have to combine so many aspects of food security and water security. When we talk about, like, since we are all leading up to COP26 now, and negotiations at the international level of climate mitigation, emissions mitigation are happening, we have to keep in mind that the conversation really affects the massive number of communities that are all around the world that must cope with climate change, and they don't have the resources to cope with climate change. So we need, when we look, I've lived in New York in a certain lifestyle in which we, the galleries and the museums and everything was part of my life. And I feel that there is a certain insularity that sets in, and one forgets the actual people on the ground who are being affected, from the massive crises that are coming. If we are all experiencing, within Miami or New York or anywhere else, small bits of inconvenience, you can only imagine what it's doing to the climate, to communities all around. So in India, which is considered one of the large, one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change because of how many people are relying on various different natural resources, it becomes much more important. This is just a glimpse of some of the exhibitions that I worked on back in India as well as in New York. I've designed some exhibitions, just giving you a backdrop. So here it is. I named my company Vetiver, and Vetiver is actually a grass that comes out of India. And I really encourage any of the artists that are here with us today and curators to really to see if there could be an installation of the grasses from all around the world in some ways as an art project, because the vetiver root, vetiver is an endemic grass from India, and it actually is very deep reaching roots that prevent soil erosion, that have a beautiful fragrance in the base of the root, that have an incredible ecosystem healing quality. And if you come to India and you talk to a lot of people, I mean, I'm not going to say majority, but quite a lot of people don't know that Khas is the grass in India. It's actually from India, and it has these incredible uses in the natural ecosystem. So we are losing our natural ecosystem, and once we lose that natural ecosystem, we lose, the way we interact with each other. We lose our entire relationship to the environment. So in the context of regenerative design, it becomes extremely important. This is a model that we adopt at Vetiver. We learn on what needs to be done. We learn with very heavy research. We do most of our design is communications-based design. Some of it is installation-based as well. And we work towards behavior change. When we work in India, you have to design for diversity. You have to design for cultural diversity, ecological diversity, and linguistic diversity. You can't just have a single design approach for anything. It's highly nuanced. Even within a single state in India, there's multiple languages and cultures, etc., which is wonderful. India is an incredible country that has done an amazing job in preserving its cultural heritage. But with the amount of change and this kind of climate change impacts that are happening, it is much more important for us as designers, as people who are able to communicate with communities as well, policymakers, to make sure that we keep this lens in perspective. So when I think of design, and when we at Vetiver think of design, we think about designing, for changing mindsets. We design narratives. We design the engagement that happens with people. What is the behavior we're working towards? What are the systems we want to design? What are the tools we need? Can we design governance? We need policy to really work closely with communities. Can we design lifestyles and landscapes? So it's wonderful. Dahlia gave wonderful examples of, Olafur Eliasson's work, and various artists are working on reconnecting us with landscapes. But each of these requires an incredible amount of collective work together. And I think artists and designers and architects and various other kind of visual thinkers need to work together in extremely holistic ways, given the urgency of what's happening. I myself, in the past 2 years, in our own house, we've grown 2 different kinds of crops, one millets and the other maize. And 2 years in a row, we ourselves have lost our crop completely to extreme rain. Now, extreme weather has become a very important part of what extreme rainfall has actually become a very important part. And we all saw this year in Europe, etc. Now, when we talk about food security, agricultural systems, what can we do? Can we transfer them to different kind of crops? Can we actually change their entire agri systems? But we also need policy to work alongside, and we need private sector to work alongside, because we need the resources. So I just want to kind of bring here to the audience here, the sense of urgency we all feel. And I think the fear that we all feel requires a cultural intervention to kind of have a balm. But that balm itself shouldn't stop us right there. And I feel that that should only just give us enough sort of fuel to go forward and do the really messy, deeper work that we really need to do, which is the uncomfortable work that most people would not feel comfortable doing. So here are some of the challenges that we tackle. So this is waste. This is a drone shot that we took in one of our communities that we work with. As you can see, the canals are absolutely, filled with waste, and these canals flow into the Yamuna River. Once upon a time, there were huge amounts of scriptures written around it. So we've got the Yamuna completely polluting. We all know, what kind of impacts this stuff has. This is agriculture. This is a farmer I recently met in my last month on a trip, a landless farmer who's lost all his land because his crop didn't yield enough. There's livestock, and there's livestock in India. There's people who are not able to act as fodder. We are losing our indigenous knowledge. A lot of agriculture and ecosystems and forests, etc., thrive because of the indigenous knowledge, but we are losing it because we are losing people who hold on to this and who don't think that it's of value, because we've got chemical industries pushing for the uptake of fertilizers, etc. So there is a lot of negative pressures here, and we need to create resilience very quickly. And these are the large issues we tackle. on forest and biodiversity, this is a photograph I took about 2 months ago. This guy is cutting one of the only trees that I saw into a long sort of a highway. This is a beautiful native tree, a babool tree. He's feeding it to the goat down there. And I asked if his son knew what this tree is and what is the value of this fodder. The son didn't know anything. So, this is just an example of how not only are we losing our native species to real life livelihood needs, but we are also losing, this knowledge, the knowledge that we really need. So, this is when we started working in forestry a few years ago, we started working with the ministry, and this was, a little data visualization we did to say, look, yeah, in the center is an image that we created for a state forest department is a different one to really reflect the relationship that people have. Culture and ecology are extremely intertwined everywhere in the world, but more so in indigenous cultures such as India. They cannot live without each other. So when we think about culture, we absolutely have to put ecology as a center point. That's my belief, because in India itself, 1 in 4 people depend on forests, and just by enhancing forests, you could do so many things to enhance their livelihoods. And within this forestry landscape, how we do is we work with communities. This is a meeting I held with some community members a few months ago in a sacred grove. So sacred groves are spaces that people save because they have a small deity established there, and now everyone is off limits, so you can't really cut the forest there, but you can't design for these communities unless you learn from them first. I've been at very different design schools in the US, very prominent ones as well, where, the learning is taught by, kids. You go there, you do your, basic learning assessment, and you come back and design a solution. But that's not how I feel it works. You really have to spend time in the community on an iterative basis for a long time, establish relationships, and then they will let you know what the needs are. To my right are the 2 community members that we've been having some great successes with over the past few months, for the past few years in waste management, which I'll talk to you about later. This is just an example of the kind of visual narratives we build. It's mostly graphic design, but if you look at the nuance of it, there is a lot of gender equity we are working with. There's a lot of reference to bio inputs and biofertilizers and intercropping, the nuances of what good agriculture looks like. So all of us know that if you can't let them imagine it, if you can't let them aspire to something, they don't know what they're aspiring towards. When you go into a village and you look at completely degraded soils, you wonder what you need with the farmer to make them feel as if something could change. And I'm not saying that a piece of art or a piece of graphic design will change it, but it provides a beginning of a conversation that we can have and establishes a trust, a visual trust between both parties to say, here, okay, you and I are imagining the same thing. Let's go down this process and let's do what actions are required. So this is the kind of work we do. Our teams go and work with farmers. We've done a very successful campaign in India called Forests Are Life for many years, in which we show the relationship between forests and people across different states, across different biodiversity. We also do, we do brand design, a recent work. If you look at this logo that we recently did, if you really observe it, it is about 10 different.
Sorry, Jaya.
Yes.
Jaya, you are at 30 minutes, just FYI.
Okay. So we design participatory solutions. We have converted a lot of our communities to making compost by actually bringing to them design solutions that allow them to make compost at home. And we've installed biogas plants. We've done a lot of work in the communities. A lot of the design we do, we actually show it to the communities first, and only then do we actually scale it up. Lots of learning tools we would make pictorially. These are all examples of our Forests Are Life campaign. We do a lot of storytelling. We tell people what is the difference between just talking about forests versus ecosystem services versus the larger climate change conversation, because all of these are interconnected, but each of us talks about them in single strains, and we don't realize there's a lot of interconnectedness here. We do a lot of training and capacity building with communities to actually teach them on the ground what needs to be done to create resilience. There's a lot of film and animation work we do just to kind of communicate to them in language that they understand. Tons of work on climate change, tons of work with policymakers. This is just an example of some of the data visualization work we do. We do make apps, etc., for conservation as well, for forestry-based decision making. We do training tools. This is a tree map that we did in Delhi to teach kids about it. We support policy narratives. We recently completed India's NDC, Nationally Determined Goals, which is going to be a nationally determined contributions, NDC Goal 5, which is going to really determine the emissions targets that India takes. So I just want to show you, this is the breadth of work that we do, and each of these references the holistic nature of our work. This is a survey we conducted on millets across India with farmers, and then we launched it through various aspects of design and engagement with high-level policymakers. This is something I'm particularly proud of. In March last year, 2020, when everyone was still debating whether masks were good or not, the principal scientific advisor to the government of India approached us to see if we could create a mask guideline. And within a few days, India became the first country to launch a mask guideline before CDC, before the WHO. So I'm particularly proud of this work because it took us 4 days to turn around a pretty intense guideline. Which followed with several different guidelines that we did for the government on mental health, on ventilation, etc. All of this work might seem, this is all graphic design, but these are all very, very solutions oriented, and we bring this deep level of understanding here for that. So this is, Buckminster Fuller, be a trim tab is our motto, and we really very much align ourselves with a systems design approach. So with that, I thank you so much for listening to me, and very happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Wow, Jaya, so much information. I'm just so blown away by your ability to merge that power of research and that scientific thinking with the power of the visual narratives that you're able to develop, and so fast, obviously, thinking about what you did for the COVID-19 pandemic. So much to unwrap. I wish we had a whole day of conversation just to really think about all the projects that you've worked with and all the issues that you're tackling. But thank you so much for that teaser, and looking forward to the Q&A. I'm sure people will have more questions for you for that. And now we're going to move on to a different kind of imagery and different kind of research, equally fascinating. We're bringing in Andrea Ling, who is going to discuss her research and a specific project that I was very fascinated by called Decay by Design, Design by Decay. And Andrea, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Amrita. So yeah, I am Andrea. I'm an architect and a biodesigner, and I work kind of at the intersection of design, fabrication technologies, and biology. I'm currently a PhD fellow at ETH Zurich in Switzerland, and I work on developing living material systems and biological fabrication processes for use in products and architecture. So I will share my screen. Here. Okay, so yeah, like I said, I am an architect and installation artist and researcher. And so these are some of the projects I've been involved in. Some of them I did for myself, some I did as a project lead at Philip Beasley's art practice, and some as a research assistant in the mediated matter group when I was a student at MIT. So I started doing a lot of work in responsive environments, which then led to me studying biologically responsive environments. So I'm going to talk today about the design, a project I did that was about the design of intentional decay and its relationship to the type of cultural, how we deal with cultural artifacts today. So this is work I did a few years ago, starting at the Media Lab, and then I continued it into artist residency at Ginkgo Bioworks, which is a synthetic biology company based in Boston. And so the theme of their residency that year was how to design a world without waste, and how might Ginkgo's biotechnologies play a role in that. And my response was to recognize that as an architect and a designer, all I do is design waste or what will become waste. And if that's the case, I need to be quite intentional about it, and perhaps design waste as nature does. So rather than seeing waste as the product of breakdown, where disposal is required, or even just recycling, could we then instead use waste as inputs or foundations for renewal? Because in natural systems, biological decay is used as a way of transforming and reorganizing material rather than destroying it for disposal. So it's a constructive process as much as it is destructive. And through it, nature is able to design systems that endure through constant renewal rather than lasting through a static permanence. So what I mean by this is, for example, these rock paintings in Western Australia, they've remained vivid they're about like 70,000 years old, and they're still quite bright. And that's because the original pigments, which were made out of plant and animal material, were colonized and then decomposed by a community of black fungus and red algae. And these organisms are symbiotic. And so because of their symbiotic requirements, they've kind of stayed within the confines of the original drawing for thousands of years. And so they've made this biopigmentation that renews itself and has lasted far longer than any man-made material system. So my project, Design by Decay, Decay by Design, is a series of artifacts that exhibit design decay. And the work is done in collaboration with Ginkgo to use biological agents as ways of transforming material throughout an object's life cycle, with the idea that I'm not destroying it, but I'm trying to reorganize it into different forms. So with the scientist, I was asking questions about species selection, concentration, the type of precision and the type of timelines and scale that's currently possible with both with and without Ginkgo's biotechnologies. And then one of the big questions I had was like, could I spatially and temporally guide where and when decay occurs? And if so, could you then harness it as a fabrication technology? And given that you're using autonomous biological organisms as the decay agents, how does a designer accommodate agency and variation within her process, where the wild and the unexpected might result? So most of the things I made were made out of these biocomposites of chitosan, cellulose, and pectin. And so these are some of the most abundant biopolymers on the planet. And they're derived from shrimp shells, tree pulp waste, and fruit skins. And the project was broken up into 3 parts. So each with a different type of decay agent as the mechanism. So using enzymes, bacteria, or fungus. So the first agent was enzymes. And so I used enzymes derived from fungus and human saliva, and I integrated into these biocomposites with really crude spatial and temporal control. And so the idea is that the degradation that results is tunable by varying the amount of enzymes you use, so the concentration and the amount of time that you keep the active enzyme in the material, and as well as which enzyme you're using. And so these were some of the results. And so the things that I was using the enzymes on, the degraded lines, they were really poor resolution. And I did this in comparison to some laser cut pieces that I had done, so using industrial techniques that I was more used to. And it was because the enzymes tend to diffuse through my material. And some of the more compelling results were when I made these funny little tripod structures, where I used enzymes to subtract holes in perimeter material, and where the kind of imprecision of the result was not as detrimental. So my second set of tests, I was learning to work with different strains of Streptomyces, which is a common soil bacteria and secondary decomposer, and it produces really vibrant pigments as well as the smell of jasmine, and it can be used in sustainable textile production. So I was trying to culture Streptomyces onto my different bioplastics, and in sterile conditions onto plain cellulose. It was quite successful, but it was really, really hard to get it to work onto the bioplastics. And I could only get it to work in like really controlled conditions at kind of the Petri dish scale. And so you can kind of see my original hope was that I could transform this funny cocoon structure I had made, and that as it decayed, it would change color to a deep indigo with time. And this was the result. So, my initial strip tests incubated over the span of about 30 days resulted in mostly white mold that kind of overwhelmed any of the Streptomyces that I had inoculated. My final set of artifacts I made were using different types of mold to decay objects in patterns. And here I was trying to test if I could guide where Aspergillus niger, which is a black mold, if I could kind of guide where it would grow and see at what point overgrowth occurred and what conditions it would would I need to kind of encourage it to stay in the original pattern? And I also tried co-culturing the Aspergillus with Trichoderma variety, which is a green mold, onto these large wooden blocks that had been computationally designed to kind of triple the surface area for colonization. And so the growth pattern was really interesting because even though I had plated the Aspergillus and the Trichoderma in different areas of the wood blocks in different valleys, the growth kind of showed them moving and mixing together and kind of happily coexisting. And then I had some other samples that just showed heavy contamination from other species. Yeah, and so that was the project. So kind of bringing this back to the theme of this panel, I think, which is, sustainable design and regenerative architecture. In cultural spaces, I wanted to kind of touch upon one of the first centers of culture that we built, which is the city and kind of the legacy of it. And so I have this image of Gilgamesh, who's the king of Uruk, and one of the first cities that was founded in about 4000 BC in what's modern Iraq. And so Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu slay Humbaba, who's the monster that protects the sacred forest. And then Gilgamesh then cuts down all the sacred trees and uses the lumber to make gates for his city walls. And after a few more transgressions, Enkidu is killed as punishment by the gods. And when Enkidu's body starts to rot, Gilgamesh casts the corpse outside of the city walls and makes a statue of Enkidu inside the walls to immortalize his friend. And Gilgamesh is considered the first hero of Western literature, in large part to the fact that he was a great builder. And so he builds these giant walls around Uruk, separating culture from outside uncontrollable nature, in the belief that he could build, if he could build, that he could build his way to immortality, into a permanent legacy if his statues are tall enough and his walls are big and strong enough. So 6,000 years later, we kind of know what some of the consequences of building like this are. When we continue to see culture as separate from nature, and we exclude all these uncomfortable processes of decay and nature's other monsters, we end up accidentally deleting some of the processes of resilience and renewal that are often paired with these monsters. And then we're no longer sheltering culture separate from nature, but rather building it at the expense of nature. So my question in my research is like, what happens when we return some of these monsters? What would happen if we kind of made the separating line between culture and nature intentionally more porous? So one of the projects I'm working on now is a riff on this, and I don't want to show pictures of work in progress, but I will show this image from Federica Villa and Francesca Capitelli, who are researchers in Milan, and they study the effects of biofilms on marble monuments. So these marble monuments are things that are supposed to be the definition of architectural firmitas and durability and longevity, but they are slowly eroding because of these biofilms. And so what Francesca and Federica have found is that these films, which are communities of fungus, bacteria, and cyanobacteria, they don't only erode the monuments, that, it's not a given that they're doing this. Like sometimes they also work to protect the monuments from the effects of pollution and acid rain. And it really depends on the species that you find in the films and the kind of environmental conditions. So I'm working with them to make these digitally designed marble carvings that deliberately harness the powers of like these organisms. So to use them to slowly etch into the work or protect it depending on the kind of textures and forms that I make, as well as the light conditions that I provide. So yeah, and then back to this legacy of separation. I think most people who work in the space of biodesign realize there actually is no separation, that all of culture, which includes the cities that we build and the museums we make and the artifacts we make, exists within a larger natural ecosystem, and there is no outside when we make these things. And so this project, Designed by Decay, is an exploration on how to make cultural artifacts that are in transit. So the forms that I recognize are temporary, and they're a precursor to some other form, with the understanding that they exist inside of an ecosystem that can make use of it in a way that I can't. Yeah, and so that's kind of all I wanted to present. Yeah, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Andrea, and you're not only on time, but you actually gave us a couple of spare minutes. It's just such a fascinating work that you do, and I'm really excited to see this red thread that has taken us, since Delia's presentation early on about this dichotomy of culture and nature, being separate or conceived as separate in Western culture, and how you all, through all the work that you do, whether it's through, your processes or Shigeru's building practices, are really trying to bring the two together. So fascinating, and I'm really looking forward to have an internal discussion, hopefully amongst you all speakers. And I just wanted to encourage, again, our audience to put your questions in the chat and be ready for a dynamic Q&A at the end of the presentations. So thank you, Andrea, so much again for joining us. And now I would like to invite architect and artist Gustav Düsing to take the floor. Gustav, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Umberta, for hosting this. I am an architect, kind of working in architecture, but also in the kind of intersection to art. I am in the end of my 30s, tall and blonde and have blue eyes. And I'm here in Rome right now in the library of the German Academy, where I did a year-long residency, which ended a couple of months ago, and now I'm still here, kind of finishing a project, and I'm gonna show some of my work right now. Just 1 second. So, all right. So yes. So here's just a kind of a few projects that I'm not going to talk about today, but just want to introduce them. My work is kind of trying to think about ways of, kind of clearing up the conception of interior and exterior, and trying to make exterior part of our conception of architecture as a kind of approach to sustainability in terms of saving energy, but also saving building materials. My structures are always very lightweight and ephemeral. I do them with recycled materials. It's not only wood, but at least I try to avoid concrete. I do a lot of installation scale things with local materials, and it's a lot about the process of making these things as a kind of cooperative design process. I do it with friends and like people I find in the cities where I do the installations, and it's always a lot of fun. For this little lecture, I kind of put things together in a kind of order, and I asked questions to architecture. And my first question is if architecture can be like the climate, in terms of that, in my point of view, architecture is too often trying to kind of keep external parameters outside, and architecture is this like thick shell that separates us from the exterior. And I argue that this is also one reason for our kind of relationship to the climate. So in other words, like how much do I care about the climate when I'm sitting in an air-conditioned interior? So my first project I'm showing today is something I did for the Antarctic Biennale, the project where I actually met Dehlia Hannah. And so this project was a kind of crazy idea, and there were artists, architects, researchers, writers, philosophers, journalists, everyone on this Russian research vessel. And we were kind of, philosophizing about the future of our planet, and we took Antarctica as a kind of example of an, maybe at least is how I saw it, as a kind of world without humans. And so my idea of approaching this continent as an architect was to kind of find out what is the kind of architectural typology of Antarctica. And this is footage from the very famous expedition by Ernest Shackleton, which some of you may know. It's very famous because it actually took 3 years for them to kind of fight their way back to Argentina, and they never reached mainland Antarctica because they got stuck in the pack ice. And after 1 year, the pack ice started crushing the boat, and they had to leave this kind of like solid kind of habitat behind to kind of from then on be nomads on this ice shield and live in tents. And so my idea was to bring a tent to Antarctica, because the Biennale was a kind of nomadic format. So we were like traveling through the Antarctic Peninsula, and we would go on shore and look at things and do art projects. So I was thinking, okay, I can bring an architectural volume, and this is something when we can, you know, inhabit a piece of land for a short given time, and then we take it down, and there's no footprint. And it's also a bit of a romantic idea about, you know, discovering new land. So I started with developing a very kind of basic tent shape, and I used this technique of spraying the tent with water so it freezes and it becomes very solid. So in that sense, you know, it's a very site-specific kind of material system that you know, uses the parameters of climate to actually create something that is in synergy with climate, and only there creates a kind of shelter, which is very fragile, which only exists for a short period of time, and which melts very easily. So here's a video which I want to show right now that I put together. So we were basically traveling around on this ship. And then when the time was right, we headed to the coast and realized the project. So the tent was set up in the AM session, and then in the PM session we started spraying it with water. So also the idea is that this kind of geometry kind of blends in with the natural kind of formations of icebergs and these glaciers and mountains, which kind of, you know, falls into shape by these natural pleats. And so there's a kind of spatial identity of Antarctica. So then you would start spraying the tent with water, where you need just basic, like, normal water, but it takes some time. Then it becomes wet and eventually starts freezing. And then it becomes this kind of like rock solid, like almost like fiberglass, like a kind of shell. And these kind of formations actually help the structure to stand up. And when it's then kind of getting warmer again, it changes its kind of state, and you can basically kind of shake it off and take it down and bring it back onto the boat. So the next question I posed to myself is whether architecture can be like an atmosphere. Kind of thinking about, you know, operating manual for Spaceship Earth, which someone already talked about. Thinking of like the kind of planet Earth as an architectural shell that kind of, you know, protects us from the deep space and, you know, dangerous radiation and all these things. And I was wondering if we can use similar principles to create an architectural volume that not just only kind of defines a space, but also creates a kind of local climate. So I started kind of using solar panels to feed a kind of rotational little electric motor that starts bringing this kind of large curtain into motion. So when the sun comes out, the kind of machine starts moving slowly in the beginning, and then becomes faster and faster. And it starts kind of opening up, and it gets into a kind of gliding mode, which is a laws of, like a kind of combination of laws of physics. But this shape that emerges, these kind of secondary waves, is the same principle that creates the so-called Rossby waves, which is these kind of planetary meanders that create weather phenomena. So it's because the same principle, the Earth rotates around an axis, and you have directional forces in the form of wind applied on it, and they kind of then get redirected into these kind of shapes. So the idea was to use the energy of the sun and the heat that was omnipresent here in Rome to create something that is, you know, an architectural space that is on demand. It exists only when needed, and it changes the climate. So it's big enough to like host a few people, and you know, it becomes a kind of round shape. It's a kind of gathering space. And at night, when the sun is down, the curtain falls down, and it's a very tiny space. And actually, I had friends staying over here, and they just put a bed in there, and it was a kind of small tent for one person.
So Gustav, we're coming up to 12 minutes. I know we want to show your responsive care video, so just FYI.
So next question is, can architecture be like a virus? And so me and my friend Carsten Chen, we were interested in designing a new type of quarantine facility in response to the Corona pandemic, which is not a new thing, but there was nothing kind of compelling that we found is a very interesting kind of architectural exercise. And so we designed a kind of tent structure that will be explained in more detail in the following video. But it's a kind of real architectural project that we worked on with engineers, and I want to show it to you.
In a short few weeks' time, the 2020 coronavirus pandemic has revealed architecture's inadequacy in responding to environmental and health crises. If humanity is entering an age of pandemics, quickly constructed field hospitals with rows of identical hospital beds will not be sufficient in addressing the increased amount of time we will need to spend in quarantine. The ecosystem, the natural world which includes coronaviruses, does not operate within fixed spatial and temporal frameworks. Viruses bloom, proliferate, and vanish unpredictably. Pandemics will become a regular feature of humanity's future. Before vaccines for new viruses can be developed, the most effective way to stop viral spread is by codifying social distancing guidelines. Virus outbreaks don't occur within fixed borders and timeframes, so neither should architecture's response. The global development of viral spread is hard to predict. An architectural response needs to be like a virus: adaptable, mobile, scalable, and resilient. The virus is not fixed in space and time, neither should the architecture designed to counter it. The pathogenic world increases the space and time between us. The Responsive Care Center is a distributed, scalable, transportable medical quarantine facility, deployable in multiple locations at the first sign of a novel virus. Depending on the nature of the disease at hand, the Responsive Care Center can be rearranged to accommodate various residential densities. The building consists of spatial layers. Movable antibacterial fabric hangs from the tent, separating interiors while allowing light to pass through. The architectural unit is essentially a system of tensile fabric atop an infrastructural plinth. Each resident is given their own private quarters, fitted with a built-in shower, toilet, and work area. A hutch allows for contactless delivery of meals and medicine. Plugging into existing networks, the Responsive Care Center is like a branch grafted onto a tree, bringing in energy, supporting health. Rather than the logic of efficiency, the architecture of the Responsive Care Center follows the principles of salutogenic design, a method of design that is focused on health and well-being rather than disease. The 2-week quarantine period, a fortnight, introduces a new social category of space and time. A new conception of time will produce new cultural phenomena. Neither a vacation nor a seamless continuation of daily life, the time spent at the Responsive Care Center will combine work with healing, self-care with self-awareness. Fortnightism is a new paradigm born of both uncertainty and diligence. As a method, fortnightism dismantles human supremacy by insisting on humanity's precarity in the face of climate and ecological change. Healing and reshaping both the body and the mind, the center challenges Western habits of consumption and comfort. What temperatures can we accept without artificial heating and cooling? How should we define personal space? Fortnightism builds periods of slowness into our lives. It is a revolution by deceleration. Tent fabric fitted with photovoltaic cells covers large expanses. Stored in shipping containers that double as clinics when deployed, the lightweight tent structure is easily shipped to any location experiencing an outbreak.
I'm so sorry, Gustav. We're going to have to cut it short because we're going to the 18 minutes mark.
Balance caused by humans, the Responsive Care Center is also a training facility for a new relationship between humanity and the world. Through the Responsive Care Center, fortnightism emerges as both a defense mechanism for the well-being of humanity and an architectural technology for multi-species cohabitation.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Gustav. Apologies for that. It is such a fascinating video, and I actually have a couple of questions, but I'll wait until later. So thank you for sharing that. And I know we're running a couple minutes behind, so I'm just going to jump right into our last speaker, Jaya Kader. Thank you. We're just so excited to hear once again hands-on approach through your amazing practice and the projects that you'll be presenting of what you've been doing in Africa, Costa Rica, and Vietnam. So Jaya, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, first, I want to say that I'm extremely grateful to be sharing this panel with all these extraordinary thinkers and activists in the world. And I am grateful to Umbretta for bringing regenerative philosophy to the form of cultural spaces, art, and design. Mostly, I'm grateful to our audience for listening to this most relevant and urgent conversation. I'm a Caucasian middle-aged woman with silver curly hair and blue eyes. I'm an architect, a mother, a grandmother, and a yogini. Shortly before the onset of the pandemic, Paolo Antonelli's 2019 22nd Triennial in Milano, Broken Nature, takes on human survival, called upon us to revisit our role as artists and designers. Humans will inevitably become extinct due to environmental breakdown, she stated, but we have the power to design ourselves a beautiful ending. For many of us privileged to be involved in design fields, it has been easy to remain behind the veil of beauty, even at times of gloom. Nonetheless, as we ponder upon the severe disconnect between our actions and the urgency of the crisis at hand, the concept of beauty expands beyond its physical dimension towards transcendence, inviting us to use culture, art, and design as catalysts for human evolution and transformation. This is the promise of regenerative design. I'm trying to share my screen here. Okay, sorry. All participants. Okay, I don't see my. Can you see my screen? I'm sorry, Bretta.
Yeah, I don't. Carrie is
great.
Jaya
okay, there, I got it.
Okay, perfect. We got it.
This is the promise of regenerative design. It provides a framework for dreaming of the world we want to create and not feel bound by systems that no longer serve us. It offers a platform from which to heal ourselves and our planet, one person and one place at a time. Regeneration invites us to put aside the intellectual constructs of our culture and tap into experiential and intuitive knowledge, so that instead of sharing my understanding of regenerative design from a place of knowing, I will share a series of experiences that have led me to fully embrace this philosophy. A few years ago, I shared with the universe an intention to serve a constituency beyond the boundaries of privilege and find ways to bridge the large disconnect I encountered between the platform of high design and the needs of the world. As an architect and sustainability advocate, I was disillusioned with the generic practices available, as I felt they did not address the systemic flaws in our culture. The projects and the people that manifested have been my greatest teachers. They include, here on the screen, Spirited Bamboo, a competition for resilient housing, a school in Africa, a peace pavilion in Vietnam, and finally, a small glimpse of a transformational retreat center in my native Costa Rica, currently in the works. Along this journey, I have discovered armies of world servants dedicated to designing and building a better world. And they desperately need our help, because beauty can bring most needed hope, healing, dignity, and transformation, which knowledge and fact alone cannot inspire, even with the best of intentions. The first project I'm going to share is our Spirited Bamboo prototype, which emerged from extensive research and collaboration we did in 2018 in preparation for a competition challenge to help address the current world refugee crisis. Since 1990, natural disasters have affected an average of 217 million people every year. Hundreds of floods, storms, heat waves, and droughts have left about 606,000 people dead and 4.1 billion injured or homeless around the world since 1995. In order to tackle this crisis, Build Academy, an organization committed to using design as a tool to raise consciousness and effect change, partnered with the World Bank and the UN Habitat, among others, as sponsors for a Resilient Home Challenge. Our Spirited Bamboo was one of 9 winning entries of the worldwide competition with over 3,000 participants. The vision of the project highlights the power of design to help manifest sustainable solutions that address environmental, economic, social, and humanistic concerns. The proposed dwelling is fabricated in its majority out of bamboo, a low-cost, highly sustainable and renewable building material. Building community through the involvement from the onset of parcel layout and construction of the prototypes is one of the primary goals of the project. New inhabitants can be easily absorbed through ease of assemblage and sourcing of materials on site, specifically the Guadua bamboo grove in the rear of the structures. The project proposes agricultural yards for farming and on-site food sourcing. The homes provide flexible plans for growth as the open porches can be converted into additional spaces as needed. Individualization of homes through colors and screens designs gives inhabitants a place to call home, grow their families, and feel inspired to build community and create self-sustaining futures. This project offered immense opportunities to experience firsthand the work of its sponsors, as it was presented in numerous world conferences, including the World Bank headquarters in DC, the World Reconstruction Conference in Geneva, the UN headquarters in New York, and the 68th United Nations Civil Society Conference in Salt Lake City, which focused on development goal number 11 to build inclusive and sustainable cities. For someone coming from the world of high design, these experiences touch deep chords with regards to priorities and the why, as opposed to the what or how of what we do. The next project I'm going to share is the Bardwoo School. In 2017, I accompanied a leadership coach, Simon Crow, to Liberia, Africa, in support of his vision to help a community ensure a self-sustaining future through a transformational and educational project. The small village of Dwenstown was in a state of stagnation where children had to walk hours to get to the nearest school, and their only source of livelihood was the making of pato, white eating clay that they roll into loaves and then smoke with mud from the river. Liberia's educational landscape is in desperate need of help. 65% of primary school-age children cannot attend school, and more than 50% of young people ages 15 to 24 are illiterate. A 14-year civil brutal war and the Ebola epidemic had left thousands of orphans in need of care. The new school is to serve as a catalyst for a new agricultural community. The master plan on the 50-acre site includes housing for teachers and students, workshops, and agricultural fields. The vision for the project involves the empowerment of Liberian youth through education and the acquisition of skills for a dignified livelihood. The project embraces a broader vision of sustainability that includes, again, social, environmental, economic, and humanistic concerns. All proposed building materials are locally sourced, and many will be generated by simple on-site production methods. I make a parenthesis here to juxtapose the vision of the project with the UNICEF building I stumbled upon in Monrovia, Liberia's capital, upon arrival. These initiatives deprive children of inspiration to create a sustaining future for themselves and condemn them to rely on our charity in perpetuity. In contrast, the proposed school is easy to build in community, comparable in cost, if not lower, and kinder to our planet and its inhabitants. More importantly, the buildings provide dignified environments where students and teachers can feel inspired to create self-sustaining future through community and a deep connection to nature. The next project is the Minds to Vines Pavilion in the province of Quang Tri, Vietnam. Since 1975, landmines have exploded under more than 1 million people and are currently thought to be killing 800 people a month. There seems to be little prospect of any end to the carnage. In 64 countries around the world, there are an estimated 110 million landmines still lodged in the ground. The cruelty and catastrophic results of landmines affect populations worldwide, contaminating their fields, their only sustaining resource, and devastating their health and livelihood. Designed in partnership with Roots of Peace, an NGO committed to the removal of mines worldwide for decades, the Minds to Vines Pavilion celebrates the sacred work of this organization and pays tribute to the victims of landmines in the area. The pavilion is inspired by nature, sacred geometry, and Vietnam's official flower, the lotus. regarded as a symbol of purity, enlightenment, self-generation, and rebirth. The ancient wisdom of the 5 elements of nature, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, prevalent in Far Eastern cultures, infused the project with nestled meanings honoring place, community, purpose, and the culture that it strives to serve. With access from 4 cardinal points, the central pavilion is nestled among the 4 spiraling landscapes and supports connection to above and below. A sculpture by artist Antoine Rodriguez evokes a net of human connection. When looked upon from the glass oculus above, the sculpture becomes a mandala as a tribute to Mother Earth and sacred geometry. Natural elements are used throughout with reverence for the surrounding landscape. The design process afforded opportunities to explore how architecture could enhance our perception of and connection to nature in order to inspire a more conscious awareness of the bearing that our actions have on our planet and its brethren. The motto of the inspiring Heidi Kuhn, the CEO of Roots of Peace, accompanied us every step of the way. Coincidences, she says, are miracles that choose to remain anonymous. Her NGO was celebrated at the UN Civil Society Conference, where we participated in a panel that explored the potential for private-public partnerships for potential healing and transformation in the world. When we visited Vietnam, I not only scouted potential land and met with local architects for collaboration, but we were immersed in the culture of place, including meetings with government officials, farmers, Buddhist nuns, and technical experts. In February of 2020, I visited my home country, Costa Rica, and attended a series of conferences on radical sustainability, ecology, permaculture, and regeneration. Costa Rica has been at the forefront of ecological restoration practices for decades and is a world model for initiatives in land conservation and renewable sources of energy. I was moved to tears with the authenticity of the speakers who were walking the talk in ways I had never experienced. I realized it was time to come back home and join many in the path towards a regenerative future. COVID held me in Miami for another 10 months. During the lockdown, as we pondered upon the unprecedented global hardship through endless Zoom meetings, I had the opportunity to co-create with several peers from my alumni council an initiative called Design Impact, transformation at the intersection of equity, climate change, and health. Since then, I have been fortunate to curate 3 panels on regeneration, where we learn from world experts in the fields of science, circular economy, indigenous wisdom, regenerative agriculture, activism, policymaking, biomimicry, biophilic, and regenerative design on the blessings of this new worldwide trend. One of the speakers was instrumental in changing the building code for mass timber construction that Dean just mentioned in his presentation. Tapping into the unique inherent potential of all living systems within place, regenerative design advocates community building, inclusiveness, and fosters a relational perspective with ecosystems, all inspired by a reverence for the infinite wisdom found in nature. It combines contemporary, modern, clean, and renewable technologies with indigenous wisdom for a more holistic approach to coexisting in harmony with Mother Earth. We are fortunate that startling new advances in science are shifting our perception of the living world as a highly animated system that thrives on collaboration and interdependency among all species. To tackle the challenges ahead, this paradigm shift in our thinking is essential. So thank you, Jaya, for the work that you do in the world. As COVID restriction eased, I was able to travel back to Costa Rica, where I have spent several months regenerating, rewilding.
So, Jaya, sorry, you're at 13 minutes now, just FYI.
Okay. Yeah. Regenerating, rewilding, reconnecting, and returning. I visited ecological, permaculture, and regenerative communities, including villages, retreat centers for Zen and indigenous practices, and regenerative farms. I was overcome with emotion to reconnect with the land of my childhood and youth, and fall short on words to express how very supported and welcomed I felt by it. In the process, I learned about world organizations like the Global Eco-Village Network, Regrarians, FemQ, and Possibility Management, who are in support of a new earth by design with optimal benefit for all living beings and systems and ecosystems. I am eager to adapt all this experiential knowledge into my future work as part of my Regen Design Lab initiative. Here's a glimpse of a new project in Costa Rica, housing prototypes for the A-Fire Transformational Retreat Center. I'm excited to find ways to capitalize on the power of beauty, alternative building methods, and design with nature at heart to create spaces for human habitation that are conducive to a more relational experience with their natural environments while contributing to the ecosystems they are part of. The mastermind behind the vision is Lindsay Sukornik, a transformational leadership expert, international speaker, master coach to global game changers, TEDx speaker, and author. She combines latest research on positive psychology, hypnotherapy, and leadership, integrating body, mind, and spirit with ancient wisdom traditions from yoga, Buddhism, and indigenous practices to create profoundly transformational experiences for world leaders who travel to Costa Rica for immersive experiences in nature. The center will be in Nosara, a small community in the province of Guanacaste along the North Pacific shore of Costa Rica that is known for nature, yoga, surfing, and active, healthy lifestyle. Nestled within one of 5 blue zones in the world where people live the longest, happiest, healthiest lives, the community is passionate about ecology and preservation. Here's our dream team already immersed in community building with indigenous craftsmen, visiting the land on horse and meeting the mayor who comes from a family of marimba builders. He indulges with a bomba, a Guanacaste tradition that involves recitation of poetry of gatherings. And speaking of poetry, I leave you with 3 quotes, and therefore in the hands of geniuses and poets who can best do justice to the significance of the matters at hand. Buckminster Fuller, who said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Leonardo said that those who are inspired by a model other than nature labor in vain. And finally, Robin Wall Kimmerer, a scientist and member of the Watomi people, citizens, in her latest book, Waving Sweetgrass, which I strongly recommend to all, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants, describes what inspires regeneration better than I ever could. To our people, the land was everything. Identity, the connection to our ancestors, the home of our non-human kinsfolk, our pharmacy, our library, the source of all that sustained us. Our lands were where our responsibility to the world was enacted, sacred ground. It belonged to itself. It was not a commodity. It was a gift. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaya, so much. Again, I know this is so much to unpack, and I know it'll take me a few days probably to process all the amazing amount of knowledge and kindness and just inspiration that we gathered through all of you today. So we're going to go right into Q&A. Carrie, I know there are a couple of questions, and then we'll open up to live Q&A. So if anyone is interested, you can just raise your hands and you'll be able to ask the question yourself. So Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, I had 2 questions come through for Dean, if Dean is still available to answer any questions. There he is on my screen. Here. Great. So we had a question that I think you answered the first half of, which was, how do you protect the paper constructions from elements such as fire or damp?
Okay, well, there are a number of ways. The first paper tube project I worked on was in 1999, which was exposed to the elements. So what we have done with the paper is we wrap the most outer layer with a very thin PVC, and then we use a waterproof material on that paper tube. That helps for preventing the moisture. The biggest concern is trying to keep the moisture out of the interior of the tube, and the end grain, everyone knows who's worked with wood, knows that the end grain absorbs the water. So we always try to prevent the ends from getting water. And there are there are materials that we could use that can also dampen fire. That is a liquid applied material. But typically, we try to design structures that are for their particular use. So if it's a temporary structure, such as a shelter, we'll build it out of paper. We'll waterproof it. But over time, it's not expected to last forever. So we would expose it. But in that same project that I mentioned, where we built 30 paper log houses in Kobe after their fire. We also built a paper church, and we surrounded it with glass partitions, sliding glass partitions. So that
Any other
was.
questions?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, Dean, I dropped out, so I wasn't sure if you were done with your question. My internet just left me, so I just joined back. Please go ahead.
I was talking about paper tubes and what we do to fire retard them, as well as mitigate any water within the tubes. But I was just mentioning, we also cover them with a glass structure. So this paper church that was built in 1995 is still around because it's been protected, which basically means that even a material that is fragile as paper, that if can do strong work and can create a building, such as the church, the Christ Church, which is also protected, and any building which is really loved by people really could last indefinitely.
Thank you, Dean. We did have one more for you as well, which was, how did the construction of the Aspen Museum prevent too much lux or LUX inside the museum?
Well, the interesting thing about the Aspen Art Museum is that we built we built like a building within a building. So the exterior of the building are a woven screen, and then behind that woven screen we have curtain walls and corridors, and then within those corridors we have the galleries, and so all the galleries are not against the exterior, but we did allow for natural light to permeate into the different galleries through skylights, we were able to control the natural light that could come into the gallery.
Thank you so much, Dean. I'll move straight on because I'm conscious of time. So we have a question for Andrea, which is, how are you envisioning artifacts or artworks in transit? So how would artists and art institutions work on any artifacts or artworks, or work with any artifacts or artworks?
That are biodegradable, I guess. So the question is, like, these temporary artworks.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they're hard to show. So I have to seal everything in plastic boxes so that they don't, release spores all over the museum. And so a lot of it is digital in the end, because I'm making these purposely to decay. When I was in Mediated Matter, the piece set, the giant pavilion we made, it's made out of the same biodegradable materials. And it now belongs to SF MoMA, and it's falling apart, and they want us to repair it, but that's not the point. Like, we don't want to repair it, because the point of it is that it is degradable and it's temporary, and this kind of fixation on keeping things the same is I think a little bit detrimental to how we can approach climate change. So, like, my question for Dean, when he talks about wrapping the paper tubes in plastic, I want to know what that happens, what that does to, like, how it might compromise the recyclability of the material, because you've made a composite that makes it much more difficult to then for the paper to degrade, right? And so it's always like this weird tension where you're trying to, like, the things that make the material so responsive and attractive for some qualities are the same qualities that make it really annoying to work with in kind of an industrial mindset, I guess.
Well, Andrea, you posed a question to me regarding the paper tubes. All the paper tubes are recyclable. There is, the way paper gets reused and recycled, it starts from virgin wood. So our highest quality paper is, our first use becomes into a writing paper, but our packaging materials, such as corrugated cardboard, become second or third generation wood. The fibers are not as, long as the first use of paper fiber. And in all recycled materials, there's a certain percentage of fibers that are not of the paper, of the wood, but it gets down cycled, and therefore it's acceptable.
Okay.
And the material and the amount of plastic was wrapped into the most outer layer is a very, very thin layer. It's almost like a film.
And is it removable then, or is it?
It theoretically can be removable, but again, when it gets recycled, as I said, it doesn't affect the next use of the paper when it goes into the mill for recycling.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, both of you. We did have one more question for Gustav, if he's still around. I know his camera's not on. There you are, Gustav. Alfredo, are you able to ask this aloud, if that's okay, or are you still having some tech issues?
I'm back and I'm good. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Umbretta.
Yeah, I can ask you directly, Gustav. I was wondering, actually, you mentioned something. If the concept of evolution by deceleration applied to architecture, I guess. And I was wondering if you could expand a bit, applying this evolution by deceleration idea to art beside architecture, since you are involved in both fields.
Yeah, so in our fortnightism, it was obviously the idea about this kind of 14 days quarantine that kind of forces you into deceleration, and through that, you enter a new kind of paradigm of time and space, and this holds the potential to, in our situation here, where we place the structure somewhere in the landscape, to maybe kind of recreate a kind of maybe lost relationship to the natural world. And that's what we meant by this revolution through deceleration. And in terms of like what it would mean for the art, I mean, in general, it's like the idea about, kind of maybe, slowing down on certain things, and maybe we invest more time in things that we usually maybe don't do for a longer periods of time. I don't know how to really answer that question. Are you kind of interested in what a kind of art context that could apply? I mean, for instance, I was once at a kind of ambient experimental music festival that was called The Long Now, and it went on for 48 hours, and there was in this Kraftwerk in Berlin, which is this huge former power plant. It's like one gigantic space, and everyone was basically sleeping on these field beds, and they were there for 48 hours. They were basically living in that club, and there was, which I found very strong, there was a sculpture where someone kind of put these long kind of ropes and a frozen block of ice at the bottom of it. And this thing was hung down from the ceiling, and it was dripping down. And obviously at some point the whole thing would crush down, but you lose kind of track of time. I think that was a great experience. Like, we really loved to be there, and we just didn't do anything. Like, we were just waiting forever somehow. And I found that fascinating. And I think this was also a kind of inspiration to develop the kind of quarantine tent, which is a kind of waiting scenario. But what do you do when you wait? You might as well, and then do something else. And I think the whole pandemic was a kind of waiting forever. Like, there was always a kind of, in the near future, things may get better, so you don't lose hope. But then it's extending and extending. And I found this inspiring to some degree, as a kind of state of mind.
So Carrie, I know we're running a little bit behind. Are there any more questions? And if not, I think we might go into our break and then right into the breakout rooms.
Yeah, so that was our last question. Thank you so much for everyone who's sent them in to us. It was really great. So we're going to go into a 10-minute breakout room. So we'll return at 11 if you're EST and 4 if you're UK based. And then when we return, we're going into breakouts.
So just a quick announcement. So Dean and Jaya are actually leaving us, so they will not be able to stay for the breakout room. So I just wanted to say goodbye to both of you. And again, thank you so much for doing this and for enlightening us with your knowledge and your wisdom and all that you're bringing to us and to the planet. So really, really appreciate for your collaboration today.
Thanks so much, guys. So we'll come back in just 7 minutes. It is now, if that's all right. See you very soon.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect.
Great.
Okay, excellent. So thank you to all of those who are staying with us. I know it's a long program and very dense of information. So I do appreciate that some people had to leave. However, thank you for those who are staying. And I see that we still have a few of our speakers with us. So I'd like to see whether there are any questions that you might have for each other. So we have Dehlia, Gustav, Jaya, and Andrea that are still with us. And if not, then we'll open up to everybody else. Don't be shy, just jump in if and when you want to.
I would love to start a conversation with Gustav. I was impressed with your project, and having these materials act as a skin, as opposed to these buildings that separate us from our natural environments, to come up with materials that they can act more as skin that react to the elements, However, when I saw the video and I started going in the spaces, I felt very separated from nature. Maybe if I were there, it would feel differently. But to me, a visual connection to nature is very important. When I was in Costa Rica, I spent most of my time outdoors, completely outdoors, and there's really a lot of new technologies that I didn't have time to go into to naturally ventilate spaces. But to me, that visual connection to the natural world and feeling like we can be in buildings that are part of nature is very important. And even though yours scientifically, I understand its purpose to act as a skin, but sensorially, it didn't make me feel like I was in nature going through the video. So.
Well, the project is is kind of focusing on a few kind of points. It's not ticking all the boxes, that's for sure. But it's a kind of mix of kind of hands-on kind of necessities, and we took on board things that we found relevant. So in a way, the structure is very open, and it consists of these kind of it's like an onion principle. So there's a kind of primary, kind of very thin kind of facade around it, made of some fabric, and then inside it's already a little bit maybe warmer or differently conditioned, and then from there it goes into private areas which are then feel kind of comfortable. And so the kind of exposure to nature here is maybe to climate. So not necessarily all about looking at plants, but it is about being exposed to fresh air, which, as we know, is like the one thing you want in a pandemic. And then it's about you want to create a certain degree of density, so the structure has to be efficient in some ways. And so the structure has a bit of a deep plan. And yeah, if you be happy enough to be on the outside of it, you would see more plants. And if you were in the depths of it, it's less. But also like it's, if you want to do a kind of feasible and believable kind of architectural prototype, or almost like a kind of infrastructure, you have to negotiate what is important for that. And if you think about this being a really kind of immediate response to a virus outbreak somewhere, then things like space in between people and kind of medical infrastructure is maybe then more important than the view. And so in a way, you're right. I mean, that's definitely something that is important, but in our structure there were things more important in that sense. That makes sense.
I think Dehlia wanted to say something there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just thought I would take up another direction, although I'm quite happy to chat about this further as interests the group. But yeah, I was very excited to learn about your work, Andrea, and some of the projects that you mentioned, as I'm thinking quite a bit about this possibility of welcoming decay, degeneration, kind of chaos of various ecological sorts into the space of the museum. And of course, conservation is a very specific place in which conservators have to grapple with this, and it's very challenging. I've been talking with the museum that I'm associated with, Arkin, about what sort of plans they have in place for kind of crisis events, things like blackouts or floods, which do happen certainly at museums. And the issues are not only the lights being out for a day, but things like the air conditioning system or the humidity control system falling into disrepair, and the way that might affect different kind of works in the collection differently. So I wanted to hear more about the way, you've negotiated. You mentioned that the piece that had been acquired by MoMA was starting to fall into disrepair, and I was wondering how you kind of anticipate that and build it into the project, and build it into also the relationship with the institutions that might display or acquire that.
Yeah, like that's hard. In terms of anticipating, I think I touched upon is just a lot of documentation while we're doing the work, like an excessive amount, and also like after the work is first completed, and then while it transforms. What happens when it gets to the gallery? I would say like the one that was acquired by SF MoMA, and that's under Neri Oxman's name, that was a donation. So there was no exchange of money. Like, so they didn't have to buy the thing and then get upset that it's falling apart. And I think museums have to, when they acquire works like this, they have to accept that, you know, these are meant to be temporary. I think like a lot of museums are starting to understand, like a lot of new media art is also like it's temporal or it's transient. And so and it's just like the shift in art making where it's experiential rather than like it's an artifact that we contemplate and sit with for decades afterwards. Yeah, and I feel like, so I don't know where I'm going with this actually, because it's like it's such a hard question to deal with. I'm trying to transport something from Switzerland to Toronto for a festival, and the carbon footprint that it's going to take, like, you know, to ship like a giant decaying work, and the kind of you know, letters of like, you know, for environmental health and safety stuff I have to do is a bit ridiculous. And so it's gotten to the point where it's like, okay, it's actually probably more sustainable and easier in the end for me to just direct someone else in Toronto to kind of do what I would do in Switzerland. And I think that might be a different model of like creating these type of artworks. Yeah.
Andrea, I agree with you that there is probably sort of an ontological shift that is needed in terms of collecting or collecting intelligence, let's say, from museum, because they do, most of museums in their remit, they do, you know, collect for, you know, the benefit of posterity. So if nothing is left, what is left to posterity somehow? And it's a valid point, but I do think that as artists are working more towards the experiential part of the artwork and less about the object part of the artwork, museum needs to adapt somehow.
Yeah.
And maybe there is something that it needs to be discussed is, you know, having the artists themselves actually not shipping works, but actually creating works in situ, which then maybe they are recycled, even if they don't decay. You know, that they're recycled before they decay, and that could be an agreement with the museum that when they acquire the work, they acquire the whole cycle of the work, including the recycling ends of that work, which will be for posterity. So it's a bit kind of I think we're still at the beginning of this type of sort of a reasoning, let's say, in terms of collecting.
Yeah, and I actually think that should be applied not just to like artworks. It's like, you know, I think companies like BASF or Dow should be responsible for getting rid of the plastic that they sell. You know, I think that should be part of the cost of the thing, instead of it being up to like individual citizens and cities to figure out recycling infrastructure. It's like, if you're going to sell something, you have to figure out how to get rid of it too. So yeah.
Dehlia, I think you're speaking, but you're muted. Or are you speaking to us? No. Oh, okay. All right. Sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you, Andrea.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I just to say that I really like the idea of that you just mentioned, Andrea, the notion that if a company, for example, makes something, that they should be the ones that should be figuring out how to get rid of it as well. And I think maybe you could say, or maybe other people say a little bit more about what the difference is between that approach and the kind of problematics of recycling, because I think there's an idea that, you know, in a way, everything is recyclable. Somebody will figure out how to get rid of it. It's a little bit different than the idea that it might degrade or decompose, or that something has to be built with its ephemerality, as Gustav has been talking about, kind of in mind. I think it would be a big shift in terms of design, architecture, museum collections to think in terms of a, you could even borrow the terminology of planned obsolescence, that, you know, maybe that's not only something to think in terms of profit motive, but also in terms of, yeah, ecological footprint. I think, yeah, it's quite an interesting idea. I don't know if you want to add something about that.
Well, I'm happy to actually comment on that. And, you know, I've seen actually a shift as we were, you know, as I was discussing in the introduction about museums, institutions, and also honestly commercial galleries that are really thinking about how to minimize their collective footprint. And, you know, definitely in terms of the use of material, like we have a couple of universities here in Miami, and I know for example, doesn't use any single-use plastic anymore. They only serve food in biodegradable, you know, or compostable containers. So I think there are ways that, you know, larger institutions can actually take real steps, as we also talked about retrofitting existing buildings, not just necessarily building, you know, new buildings. And I also I wanted to point out something that I found fascinating, Andrea, as I was looking at your website and the video about your project that you share with us. It's really about that parallel between this sort of decaying and regeneration that comes from it with a circular economy. And I think one of the scientists that you work with actually made that parallel, right? And so how can we, you know, adapt our economies and hold responsible those who are producing so much debris to actually find a way to make use of it and to recycle, or to use plastic that is somehow compostable. And even though, as we know, one of the big thing about this bioplastic is it's part of a big lie. It's really hard to actually compost. It certainly doesn't happen in my backyard composting. So I think part of it also goes to educating. And I think what we heard from Jaya, that what she's doing in India, it's really sort of make people understand that recycling, which you know, was the big 1980s and I think 1990s buzzword, it's really a cover up for feeling good about the waste that you produce without actually having an impact. And so how can we hold those who create that, you know, that plastic issue? How can we hold them responsible? And there's a lot of greenwashing out there. I mean, I've watched a gazillion of these panels and interviews with, you know, Coca-Cola, sustainability, and you know, managing director, whatever. And you know, it's really hard to discern what is actually happening and what is just a big greenwashing campaign that these big companies are implementing, essentially to kind of trick us into still buying their products and not really care because we feel good that, hey, they're doing something about the environment. Anyways, my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting point about, you know, I did this work at Ginkgo, which is, you know, it just went public, right? And so they have to make money. And so, but like all the scientists, like the ones in the videos, they're very, very cognizant of like how artificial the systems of capitalism are when you impose it on like biodesign, right? Because biology has its own currency, which is not a dollar, right? It's energy and like matter, and it's, you know, and these processes of decay and regeneration are always coupled. You can't decouple them and then expect, you know, renewable resources without the death of something else, right? So so I think it'll be really interesting to see that company as it, you know, as it goes public and as it has to kind of survive in a capitalistic system and still try to I guess do good and work with like organisms that don't care about money, right? So yeah, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Andrea. And I think Guadalupe, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, it's more a comment about, I mean, the whole presentations. It grabs my attention, many things. One, I love how Alfredo said that art is going to experiential. And I think it's very important that you get some impactful experience to really change or to really think about changing. Like Umbrella's exhibition now in Miami, like it's really very impactful. So it really takes you to rethink things. And I think it's very important now that we re-empower each individual to do something. Because I know that it sounds like a cliche, but it's still not happening in the massive way. It's starting to move more in the massive way. But the more we receive these experiences and the awareness that it is truly in our hands to do something, I think this is the length the action will you know, influence what is happening. So I truly believe, and I see the impact of art, like Andrea's decay, like Dehlia's the nature taking the galleries, I think it's fantastic. And also the architects, I love Jaya, how accessible seems your projects to be made. It's like making it accessible to individuals. I think it's key in this moment to really take a massive action. Thank you.
Thank you, Guadalupe. Anyone else? I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat and I'm not seeing. Okay, raise hands. Anyone else who wants to add a question or a comment? If not, I have a question. Oh yes, Moya, please.
I suppose I was just reflecting on art institutions, and we have sort of questions around the conservatorship of artwork and those kind of temperature conditions that are required for loans, the humidity. And I was just reflecting, I think it's really interesting talking about the experiential and works that we welcome, you know, that's part of the concept of it, that degrade. But as a sort of sector, we were just talking last night with our trustees about, you know, how do we shift our carbon footprint? So unless there's a sort of shift in terms of how tight we need to keep that, it's very hard to stop that use of energy within our buildings. And I was also reflecting on this sort of sealed box that we kind of have, this outside world, the inside world where we're protecting it. And actually, really that kind of moment where you're saying, well, what happens if there's a massive energy crisis? And those systems that we've built are no longer reliable for maintaining that. And it's also, you know, whereas if we had spaces that are built that are using the natural environment in, you know, in a more holistic way, in the longevity of things, maybe that actually protects our work even more. So, you know, really interesting from an architectural perspective going forward, but also what are the kind of boundaries and collective agreement that as a sector we have in terms of how we take care of work. What do we feel is really important to maintain for posterity, and what can we let go, or what moves into a digital format. So yeah, I suppose just kind of interested in that. And as well, I think our place as galleries, as institutions, in being a part of our community and how we amplify those messages and have that discourse with our communities.
Thank you, Moya. You know, one thing that came across while I was doing research to prepare for this panel that I honestly, I was surprised about, you know, looking at sort of the, you know, the 10 greenest buildings, 10 greenest, you know, cultural institutions. And amongst the top 10, there was the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg and the Reina Sofia in Madrid, which are obviously not new constructions. Essentially, the reason why the Hermitage is actually amongst, I think, the first 3 or 4 is simply because they shifted their entire lighting system to LED lights, which one would think, you know, big deal. But the amount of reduction in terms of the carbon footprint just by doing something as simple, again, with something that really surprised me and really made me understand that there are practices, I think, that institutions can work with that are not necessarily implying, you know, big expenses. That, you know, those who obviously can shift to photovoltaic panels, they should do so. But there's also smaller things that we can do that can really have an impact on larger scale. And obviously, we know photovoltaic panels, we have the issues of battery life, we have the issues of actually decarbonizing our grid so that the energy that we use, the electricity that we use, it doesn't come from greenhouse gases, but fossil fuels, but it comes from, you know, from clean energy. But it was something that struck me about the simplicity of some actions that we can take as leaders in institutions and cultural institutions to have real impact. So that, you know, obviously as curators, we had our whole Congress last year about how to minimize our carbon footprint collectively as curators, whether you're working for institutions or as a freelancer. And this was obviously more a deep dive into an institutional setting. So thank you.
Are there any more questions or comments for any of the speakers so far?
Well, I just wanted to ponder upon Dean's statement, which I know of, that the construction industry is responsible for 40% of the carbon output. And I really believe that it's going to take a shift in how we perceive what are the things that we really need to live in, because we're obsessed with this culture of permanence and monuments and grandiosity. And I feel that, you know, everything in science is telling us that everything is impermanence. And I think that there's that disconnect. There's that disconnect between the culture of the Anthropocene, of how we think we're the center of the world, and we think that we're so important, and we think we can just, you know, use the earth in every way that we want, as opposed to observing how nature really works, how everything is changing. That's why I really like, you know, Gustav's experiment, and let's find a different way to build that it's not these monuments to our egos, that we're so important and we're the only thing that matters on this earth, and everything else has to be subservient to us. And museums, I mean, unfortunately, I mean, many of them, they're just big testaments to the egos of the towns that build it, or the patrons that build them. And I think that there's very little regard for this greatest of art forms, that is the ecosystems that we destroy when we put these monuments to, you know, that are just completely self-serving for us sustaining the Anthropocene and our identity, that we are the ones that matter, and we're the only ones that are sentient, and we're the only ones that are important. And I'm just feeling a little bit overwhelmed with the incredible shift that this is going to require in thinking and consciousness, so that we can really build stuff to provide our needs, to provide our shelter, but is not so destructive to everything and every other species. So.
Thank you, Jaya. I think that's so important what you're saying. And I would say that if we don't have any more questions, we're about a 10 to 12. What I would like to ask, and I'm happy to start, is to maybe Carrie and Alfredo think about your sort of one takeaway from today's discussion, and kind of recap a little bit what we learned and what we heard from. And in my case, it really started, I think, with reading more about the Rewilding the Museum project that Dehlia spoke about. And Dehlia, at one point you talk about trying to accomplish a come-togetherness sense to break down Western-centric environmentalism, which is focused on the distinction between nature and culture. And I think that's really the red thread that I've been mentioning a few times, that it's been running through all these presentations. It's about that, bringing those two, that dichotomy back together, right? Bringing understanding that nature is not different from culture and vice versa. And obviously it goes back to what Jaya was talking about. And so for me, that's really my takeaway, is like, how can we all be more cognizant and of this, and how we can really integrate nature into culture and vice versa, whether we're creating culture as culture producers, as artists or writers or curators, or as architects and designers, and really look at what we can learn from nature and its processes, just like Andrea showed us. So that's my takeaway. And Carrie or Alfredo, do you have one last comment before we close?
I don't know. I was struck actually also from the what Moya mentioned actually. Rethinking about my job as an institutional sort of a director, the whole protocol about kind of a art exhibition and shipping and insurance and climate control cases to ship work from one continent to another, it seems a bit out of pace with the current sort of direction. So I was just thinking that maybe one thing I would take away, it would be to really try to invite artists to actually produce work that doesn't involve these things. And if they cannot produce new work, I mean, trying to find ways actually that doesn't include this kind of a huge sort of a logistics sort of a. And I know there is a whole industry and a whole economy around it. I don't want to, it's not that I'm against sort of in principle of those industries and business and people working in that. But it seems to me that we, because in the name of posterity, we created a whole kind of a sealed system that it's superimposed to what would make sense. And is go contrary to what makes sense. So I'm not quite sure how to solve it, obviously, but that would be my takeaway thought, for sure.
I think mine would be about the potential damage that something that we want to be permanent could actually have, and I think that was raised quite a few times, which I guess leads me into how we as visual arts organisations in Plus Tate and architectural and arts organisations across the world, how we should be looking at what we actually do moving forward, which is a huge topic. So I suppose what I would end with is try not to be too overwhelmed by all the information that is actually available, and begin with the small changes. There's always something that we can do, whether it be changing to LED lights or any kind of small changes like that. It would make a difference. So let's just keep the conversation going, and we've got a peer network here and a lot of connections here to keep doing some really good work. So I guess that's my takeaway for today.
Fantastic. Well, Thank you so much. Again, huge thank you to Andrea, Jaya, Gustav, and Dehlia for sticking with us all the way through the end. And for those of you in the audience who stayed with us, I recognize no names. Hi, Susan. Hi, Guadalupe. And just fantastic. Thank you, Sari, Carrie, and Alfredo for working with me on this. Really appreciative of the space of more learning and more sharing that we've created today.
Yeah, thank you as well. And thank you to Alfredo for introducing us. It's been great to see everybody. Thank you to our speakers. And I think we will leave it there. We're 5 minutes early. We've done brilliantly. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Have a good
Awesome.
day.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.